Okay, folks, let's just see what we can do. And I can see it's not going to do a good shot of our board. Would you guys mind if I try turning out the lights because it's really washed out on the... Okay. So folks, again, what we're going to do today is we're talking about symbiotic fungi. And symbiotic fungi are fungi that live with another organism, or sometimes it's maybe 2 or more different organisms living together. So we call this general phenomenon symbiosis when 2 different organisms live together. And so we'll pretend it's just two different organisms. We call the partners symbiotic partners. And there's 3 different types of symbiosis based on the outcome for the 2 symbiotic partners. So the best one, you guys, is called mutualism. And mutualism is when both of the symbiotic partners benefit. So let me see if I can remember which screen I'm using here. So in a win-win symbiosis, both partners are going to benefit. Okay, all right. So, so our 2 examples, folks, of mutualism, which is when both the partners benefits, is lichen. And lichen is a symbiosis between a fungus and a photosynthetic partner. And the photosynthetic partner is either a cyanobacterium or an algae. And we have some beautiful examples, folks, of lichen over here on bench 4. There's a beautiful poster that one of your colleagues did. Let me bring over some examples of lichens. And if you've been for a walk out in nature, you've probably seen lichens. They grow on rocks, they'll grow on trees, they'll grow on dead branches on the ground. And they can have different forms. Now for our lab exam, folks, you don't need to know the different forms. I'll tell you the different forms, but you don't need to memorize this for the lab exam. So if we have lichen that are growing tightly adherent, say to a rock or maybe to a branch, this is called crustose lichens. If we have lichen that are growing attached by one edge and then the other edge is loose, almost like a leaf, that's called foliose lichen. And if we have lichen that are growing as a little bush, this little growth, this is called fruticose. Okay? But again, you guys, you don't have to tell me crustose, foliose, or fruticose. But if I put one of these on the lab exam and put a pointer at the lichen and ask you to identify the specimen, what are you going to tell me? Lichen, good, okay. And then furthermore, folks, it's important to know the 2 symbiotic partners. So what are the partners that make up a lichen?
Cyanobacteria and fungi.
Good. So a photosynthetic partner, either cyanobacteria or algae, and a fungus, right? So the fungus, you guys, we might ask, well, what's the benefit of the fungus? Well, the fungus is going to provide an anchor on the surface of a rock or a tree or a log so that the photosynthetic partner will remain exposed to the sunlight. Often lichens are like early pioneers in really harsh environments, maybe really windy environments. So if it was just a little photosynthetic algae or cyanobacteria, they might get blown into a crack or a hole right where there's no light. So the fungus creates a structure that holds the algae or the cyanobacteria on the surface where the sunlight will come. Now, why is the sunlight important for the cyanobacteria or the algae? Why is sunlight important? Oxygenic photosynthesis, right? So remember, both the cyanobacteria and the algae, why are they green in nature? Chlorophyll A, and that permits which process? Oxygenic photosynthesis, and what's required in addition to chlorophyll A? Light, right? Good job, you guys. So the little photosynthetic partner is going to make molecular oxygen and sugars and feed the sugars to the fungus. Remember, the fungi are chemoheterotrophs, right? And furthermore, you guys, it's believed that the fungi, in addition to providing kind of like an anchor for the photosynthetic partner, the fungi, because they, with their hyphae, they have a large surface area for water absorption and mineral absorption, right? So this is definitely win-win. Okay, so good job, you guys. Any questions on that? Yeah. And in this PowerPoint slide, you guys, and I apologize, you know I can't work one computer, let alone two, so I'm having trouble going full screen. But we have some beautiful examples of lichen here. We have the living examples here. And then this is just some cross sections, you guys, so you can see the fungal hyphae, and then creating this network that enclose the beautiful green algae or cyanobacteria. So it's really cool. In the past, you guys, we've done what we call a lichen shake, but I didn't go out and harvest fresh lichen. You really need fresh lichen for the fungal shake, the lichen shake to work. So for right now, we're going to skip the lichen shake. All right. And then, folks, in mutualism, and apology, guys, flipping back and forth. So on our worksheet, this is the day 2. So we have our lichen on 2 pages, right? And now we're going to flip to the second symbiosis between a fungus and another organism. And in this second example of symbiosis, you guys, again, this is win-win. So this is called what? What do we call win-win symbiosis? Mutualism, right? Our second example. This is where a fungus and a plant form a cool win-win mutualistic relationship. And specifically, you guys, the fungi are going to live around the plant roots. And thus, we call this symbiosis mycorrhiza, myco referring to fungi, rhiza referring to roots, right? So if you guys, if I ask you, what is mycorrhiza, what would you tell me? Nailed it, right? Mutualistic relationship between fungus and plants. And where are the fungi going to live? Around the roots, right? And you guys, in your instructions, it said for you to look in your micro B box. It tells you to look at slides 51 through 54. But we're going to cut that down, you guys. In your micro B box, if you could look at slides 51 and 52 only. And that's because, you guys, we're only going to look at one type of mycorrhiza. We're going to look at the ectomycorrhiza. And ecto means, outside of. So in ectomycorrhiza, we'll see the fungi forming a beautiful network of fungal hyphae on the outside of the root. And in addition, you guys, they can penetrate the root, but they never penetrate through the root cell walls. So they're always living outside of the plant cells, right? They can cover the root in this beautiful network of hyphae. And indeed, you guys, that's what I'm hoping you're going to see on your slides on the ectomycorrhiza. You'll see the cross-section of the plant root, and then you'll see this beautiful network of filaments around the outside of the root. That's always what I put the pointer on in the ectomycorrhiza, on the fungal hyphae that are covering the root. And I'll ask you, okay, what is this specimen? And I have to tell you in the question, this is a cross-section through a plant root, right? Yeah? And then if I have the pointer on that beautiful filamentous network of fungal hyphae, you'll know, aha, it's mycorrhiza. And if I ask you which organism is at the tip of the pointer, and I put it on those beautiful hyphae, what are you going to tell me? That's the fungus, right? And what are the structures, those long filaments? The hyphae. Good job, you guys. And again, you guys, is this symbiosis, what type of symbiosis is it? Mutualism, which means win-win, right? So again, folks, we asked, how are the fungi helping the plant? Well, again, very similar, you guys, to the lichen. The fungi hypha have incredible surface area. So that's going to greatly absorb water that can be given to the plant. And also, really important, the fungal hyphae help absorb minerals from the soil, right? So the fungi helps the plant by giving water and minerals. And how does the plant, you guys, help the fungus? Exactly, right. The same thing as the lichen, you guys. So the plant, right, photoautotroph, carries out oxygenic photosynthesis up above the ground in the sunlight. The plant's making sugars and can transport their sugars to the roots, where the fungi, which are chemoheterotrophs, right, they have to have preformed organic molecules. The plant feeds the fungus the sugars. Isn't that cool? I mean, it'd be so awesome if we could all live as mutualists like that, right? Very cool. Okay. Ew, why are you doing that? Okay, so this one, obviously, you guys, it's going to take me a while to get used to this little puppy. Okay, apologies. Okay, dokie, come on. Oop, oop. So the next one we're going to go to, folks, again, it's a fungus living in symbiosis. Can't quite figure out why I can't get my pointer in here. So odd. Okay. The mysteries of computers. Okay, you guys, so what we're going to be moving towards is a concept of fungi living with another organism and causing harm, right? And we're going to discover, we could describe that symbiosis as win-lose, and that's called parasitism. But one of the fungal parasites we're going to be discussing, it can also live in what's called a commensalistic relationship. And in commensalism, one partner benefits and the other partner is neither harmed nor do they benefit, right? And this is often what our opportunistic pathogens are. They start out as commensals. And so specifically, folks, the commensal we're going to talk about is Candida albicans. So this is a unicellular fungus. What do we call unicellular fungi? Yeasts. Good job, you guys. And we know that yeast reproduce asexually by which process? Remember Saccharomyces, you guys? How was it reproducing asexually? By budding, right? Yeah, and you're going to see the same phenomenon with Candida albicans. It's going to reproduce by budding. And that's always a hint you're looking at a yeast. Okay? Now, you guys, right now, all of us have low numbers of Candida albicans in our mouth, in our intestines, in the rectal anal area, in women on the vaginal mucosa. But normally they're in really low numbers, so they don't cause harm. One reason they're in low numbers, you guys, is our good beneficial bacteria, like our lactic acid bacteria. They're making lots of acids and lowering the pH on the surface of the mucous membranes. And the Candida albicans can't grow really well at those low pHs, like around pH 4. And furthermore, you guys, the good lactic acid bacteria are competing for nutrients and living space, binding sites to our cells. So as long as our good members of our microbiome are healthy, usually the Candida albicans is kept at really low numbers, right? So again, the Candida is benefiting because we're providing food, warmth, and moisture, right? But at low numbers, the Candida isn't harming us, right? So that would be considered commensalism. But what's really important, you guys, is these symbiotic relationships can change, okay? And we'll talk about that in the next type of symbiosis, which is called parasitism. So you guys, parasitism, what kind of symbiotic relationship do you think parasitism is? Yeah, somebody's winning, but what's happening to the other partner? They're getting harmed. Yeah, right? So in parasitism, you guys, the fungus is benefiting, right? But they are invading another organism and using them as what? Preformed organic molecules, so they end up causing harm. Okay, so parasitism is symbiosis in which one partner wins but the other partner loses, is harmed. Okay, and you guys, these are going to be our fungal infections, and there's a fancy name for fungal infections. They're called mycoses. M-Y-C-O-S-E-S, that's plural. Mycosis, M-Y-C-O-S-I-S is singular. And you guys remember on the lab exam, I don't care if you use a plural or singular ending. I'm not going to mark you wrong, okay? But these are fungal infections. And folks, we have fungi can infect plants, they can infect humans. We're always, kind of, because we're human-centric, we always kind of focus on fungi that infect humans, but we'll see that when fungi infect plants, that too can directly or indirectly cause harm to other animals, right? But you guys, let us, hopefully I did this in the same order. Oh, sugar. Okay, let's see here, folks. All right, you guys, so what we'll do is we'll first take a look at the fungi that cause infection in humans, right? And I apologize, you guys, if you're looking at your worksheet, okay, we're on the ectomycorrhiza page, and you turn it over, and there's a fungal parasite of plants called Claviceps purpurea. We're going to skip that for right now, and we're going to go to the next page. And the following page, you guys, apologies, we're going to look at dermatophytes. So this is the page that shows like a foot and a head and a little puppy. Okay, so these are the dermatophytes. Now, dermatophytes, folks, luckily, they only cause what we call superficial infections. They're only going to infect our skin. They aren't going to go deeper into our tissues. So we call them superficial. And these these fungal pathogens, you guys, they have an old name that is stuck. They're called dermatophytes. Dermato from skin. Phyte was an ending for plant because in the old days they thought fungi were plants, so it's kind of misleading. But dermato tells us that these fungi infect skin. In addition, folks, they'll infect our hair and our nails. And the reason is these fungi are really unusual. They make an enzyme called keratinase, and keratinase breaks down this strong protein that we find in keratinized epithelial cells of the skin, in our hair, and in our nails. So they're using the keratin as food, right? Isn't that crazy? So we say the dermatophytes, you guys, they're going to infect keratinized tissue. And so traditionally, if we have, and again, it's hard to see here, you guys, but let's say I have a dermatophyte infection of my skin, it would start out as a red inflamed area, and then the area of inflammation proceeds outward. So some people in the old days thought it was a worm in there causing that expanding lesion. So what do you think the common name for dermatophyte infection of the skin is? Ringworm, exactly, you guys. So remember, it's not a worm, it's a fungus, right? And ringworm, you guys, it's can be common, probably one of the more common fungal infections worldwide. And it's important to know, you guys, if you have a patient present, you want to know how did they get infected. So there's 3 ways your patient can get infected with dermatophytes. They can come in contact with another person that's infected, right? So human to human. Really importantly, you guys, especially in children, many of the dermatophytes are what we call zoonotic. What's a zoonosis? Pathogen transmitted from a non-human animal to people, right? So lots of non-human animals have dermatophytes, and some of those animal dermatophytes can be transferred to humans. So especially if you have a little child present with ringworm, you always want to ask, did you recently adopt what? A little kitten or a dog, right? Because often when you get kittens or dogs, especially from the SPCA or from the pound, sometimes they'll have dermatophyte infections. And the way you can tell, folks, on your worksheet down at the bottom there, you can see a little puppy, and you can see those areas of what we call alopecia. That's hair loss. It's a fancy name for alopecia. And what do you think is causing those areas of alopecia? Dermatophyte, right? And maybe you guys, the photo up above, but maybe this is a little boy, maybe, in the family that adopted that puppy, and what's happening to his hair? The alopecia, right? So again, especially in kids, if you see a dermatophyte infections, always ask the family, did you recently adopt a kitten or a puppy? And the reason that's important is you want to make sure that the infected puppy or kitten gets treated, right? Otherwise, you're just going to continually get infected. Okay. So again, folks, we can have dermatophyte infections of the skin. We can have dermatophyte infections of the hair, calling alopecia. And another one, you guys, and I've had this, you can have dermatophyte infections of your nails. And sometimes it's really hard to get cleared up. Yeah, I think what happens is the fungi can invade the nail bed, and then it gets really hard to treat them, right? So this is a fancy name, you guys, for a nail infection. You don't have to remember this name, but it's called onychomycosis when you have these nail infections. It's one reason, folks, that if you go to like nail salons or spas, it's probably a good idea if you bring your own your own, what would you call them, tools, for working on your nails, because the dermatophytes can contaminate like nail clippers and what are those things called? I have no nails, you guys, so I don't know what they're called. File, right? So the dermatophytes can contaminate those instruments, and if they aren't cleaned really well, then the next customer that those instruments are used on, you can have transmission from the instruments to the new patient. So in the past, several of your colleagues have worked in like nail salons or spas, and they say always bring your own equipment, right? It's like, good idea. Like, it's good. I don't have any nails. I don't have to worry about that. Oh, but I know another one, you guys, that is really important is that there's also dermatophytes in dirt. Their spores can be in dirt. So I got my toenails infected, and I think it's because I clipped my nails really harshly, probably did a little bit of damage, and then I love to garden, and I have these grubby old dirty shoes, and I think I probably was grinding dirt into that kind of damaged nail area, and I think that's how I got mine. I think I got it from the dirt. That's also of concern, like folks in the military, right, that are out in the dirt and soil, and also if you're a hiker, you have to worry about keeping your, hopefully preventing infection of your nails. Okay, and then folks, we'll move from our dermatophytes to another superficial opportunistic pathogen, and this is the Candida albicans. Remember, you guys, we said they live as commensals on most of our mucous membranes, and it's only when the members of our good normal microbiome are suppressed, or if our immune system is suppressed, that Candida can start growing like crazy and cause an overgrowth. And when Candida grows to really high numbers, they cause a really strong inflammatory reaction. So we can have oral candidiasis, you guys. It's called thrush. Maybe you've heard of thrush. And here's a person, actually two people with thrush, you guys. What you would see looking into the mouth is kind of this creamy, thick layer on the tongue or maybe on the insides of the mouth. It can cause vaginal candidiasis. That's a so-called vaginal yeast infection that a lot of women suffer from. And then in everybody, babies, adults, men and women, you can have anal rectal candida infections. In some babies, some of their diaper rash, that could be a candida infection. And usually risk factors, you guys, for candida infections, one really common one is if you're on broad-spectrum antibiotics. Why would broad-spectrum antibiotics put you at higher risk for a candida infection? Who's getting killed with broad-spectrum antibiotics? All your good bacteria, that's right, all those good lactic acid bacteria. And why aren't the candida killed? Think about classification, you guys. What are candida? Okay, so are they bacteria? No, they're fungi, right? So would the antibiotics kill them? No, right? So you're wiping out your good protective bacteria and leaving this opportunistic pathogen. So it takes the opportunity, all the competitors are gone, they grow like crazy and cause these candida infections. Another thing to remember, you guys, is if your patient is immunocompromised, that can also permit the candida to grow to high numbers. And indeed, you guys, before we knew about HIV/AIDS, the clue to the physicians that something seriously wrong was these young men who should have healthy, strong immune systems were presenting with horrible candida infections. And that was a clue to the physicians that something was wrong with their immune system. That was like our first alert that some new horrible immunosuppressive pathogen was at work, right? So again, if you have a patient with recurring candida infections, really severe candida infections, really talk to them, find out what's going on in their life, find out if they've had antibiotics, find out if there's anything in their life that could be suppressing their immune system, right? Because that's often a good sign. I mean, it's not a good sign, but it's an alert. Good. So, folks, what you'll be looking at in your prepared slides is budding candida. And again, you guys, this is so helpful. Our son had a really horrible throat infection, and we're trying to figure out, was it strep throat or what? So we took just a throat swab, and I brought it into the lab and just made a smear and just did a simple stain on it. And what did I see? Budding yeast. So I knew it wasn't bacterial. Who was it? Candida, right? Candida albicans. So anyway, it's a nice, quick identification. At least you know it's not bacterial. It's yeast. It's fungal. Okay, you guys. So then let me see here. So we did our dermatophytes. Oops. And apologies, you guys. The Candida was the slide before the dermatophytes. We're going backwards, you guys. Apologies. So you guys, let's take a look now at a. We're going to switch to a fungal parasite of plants before we finish with the really nasty guys, our systemic fungal pathogens. Let me see here. We're going to come back. We're going to come back to Coccidioides and Cryptococcus, you guys. So just really quickly, what we're going to do is take a look at a fungal parasite of plants. And you might say, well, who cares? Well, worldwide, you guys, fungi spoil lots of food. And in many parts of the world, this is significant because people don't have enough food, right? So if fungi are spoiling their vegetable crops or fruit crops, that's significant, right? Because when people don't have enough to eat, they become immunosuppressed, right? They're at much higher risk for opportunistic infections. And furthermore, you guys, many fungi make toxins, and there's a fancy term for this, you guys, are called mycotoxins. Mycotoxins. And if humans or animal ingest some of these mycotoxins, they can cause really serious problems. So you guys, we're going to focus on one mycotoxin only. And this is a mycotoxin produced by the fungus called Claviceps purpurea. And Claviceps purpurea loves to grow on moist grain, especially rye. For some reason, they love to grow on rye. So a spore will land, you guys, on the rye. It's kind of hard to see here. And the fungus will germinate and use up the grain, as a source of food, forming this black structure. And you guys, you don't have to know the name of the black structure, but depending on the book, these are either called ergot or sclerotia, right? And you can see, you guys, if you came along and harvested this grain, you'd be harvesting that claviceps mass of hyphae, right? And you're like, well, who cares? Well, if the grain is ground up to make flour, this powerful toxin that the claviceps makes called ergotamine is going to be present. And ergotamine is heat resistant. So baking it doesn't cause any damage to it. So if you were to eat the ergotamine, you guys, in this contaminated flour, the ergotamine looks really similar to LSD. So what are you going to have? Hallucinations, right? And also it can cause vasoconstriction, and that can cause reduced blood flow. So what's going to happen to your tissues? They'll die, and you'll get necrosis, right? So you can have necrosis in the periphery, like hands, fingers, feet. And furthermore, you guys, it can cause smooth muscle contractions of the uterus. So if the person is pregnant, what will happen? Have a miscarriage, right? Yeah. So this was really common, you guys, I think in the Middle Ages, and they would have entire villages literally going crazy, right, from the LSD-like hallucinations. So there's stories of like people jumping down wells or jumping in lakes thinking they're fish and they can't swim, so they drown, or people jumping off cliffs thinking they're birds and they can fly. It's always reminded me, you guys, of the King Arthur stories of Merlin teaching the young King Arthur as a little boy, and the stories were that Merlin would turn Arthur into a fish or a bird. I go, it's ergot poisoning, right? They were hallucinating. But it is really sad, you guys, because when this struck a village, it could be devastating. There was a specific order of monks, the monks of Saint Anthony, and they dedicated their lives to taking care of people that were suffering with this ergotism or ergot poisoning. And in addition, you guys, I think with the vasoconstriction, the ergot poisoning causes a burning sensation. So ergot poisoning is also called St. Anthony's fire. And one of your colleagues, this is several years ago, this is a cool picture, did a poster on ergotism and St. Anthony's fire. And what was really cool was in her research, she discovered that some scholars think that do you all remember way back when about the Salem witch trials here in North America, right? Where these young women accused their neighbors of being witches, and what happened back in the day, you guys, if you were accused of being a witch? You were burned, right? And so scholars have been trying to figure out, were these the original mean girls, you know, like, but they think what happened, the girls were suffering from what? Ergot poisoning, right? They were hallucinating, right? And with devastating results. So now you guys, I was doing some reading, so like in the United States, we grow grains that are resistant to Claviceps purpurea, but they're, you know, some grain can get infected, and unfortunately what often happens is like maybe moldy grain gets fed to livestock, so you can still have ergot poisoning like in cattle, and it's so sad, you guys. They'll their hooves will fall off, right? Their tails will fall off. Yeah, it's really tough. So that's something that you always have to think about if you're on a farm and you see that your cattle are going lame and they're bleeding from their hooves and their tails are bleeding and stuff. You got to think about, oh my gosh, did we feed moldy grain to them, right? Okay, so you guys, now more vocabulary. You guys, what do we call a fungal infection? Okay, just broader. That's a specific example. Mycoses, right? But what do we call? What would we call it if our patient swallowed a mycotoxin? Is that an infection? No, that's an intoxication, right? And remember, guys, intoxication is your patient is not going to be contagious. They've literally swallowed a poison. But it's really important you find out what was the source of the poison, right? So that other people don't swallow it, right? So it's really important to find out, what did they eat that caused that intoxication. All right. And now, guys, I do apologize, kind of going back and forth. The PowerPoint is not in the same order as our worksheet, so I do apologize. The last two you guys we're going to talk about are actually the two from the handouts today. These weren't part of your handout, and it's because in our original lab manual we didn't have slides for these two important fungal pathogens, but again, I think it's so important we know about them. So you guys, the first one that we're going to talk about is Coccidioides Immitis. And Coccidioides Immitis, it's what we call a dimorphic fungus, meaning it has two forms. So when it's growing out in nature, it's growing as a saprobe. A saprobe is an organism that lives off of dead things like dead plants, dead animals. So Coccidioides Immitis, out in the soil, in the dirt, it's growing as a filamentous mold, living off dead things, right? But it can form a really interesting type of spore called an arthrospores. And arthrospores, arthro means jointed. What happens in arthrospore formation, a hyphae breaks into these little jointed arthrospores, right? So let's say you're out farming or you're doing construction work. You're stirring up the soil, and what gets airborne? These arthrospores, right? And then what can happen to you? You can inhale them, right? And that's how you're going to get infected with the Coccidioides Immitis, is through inhalation of spores, right? And again, if you're a farmer, you're at high risk. Construction, you're at high risk, right? And so what will happen is that, and I'll use our handouts here. So the infection is officially called coccidioidomycosis, but because it was identified here in California in the San Joaquin Valley, its common name is San Joaquin Valley fever or just plain valley fever, right? Kind of a hotbed of infection in the Bakersfield, Fresno, Buttonwillow area. That's a kind of high prevalence of infection. And you guys, this is infecting kids down in the valley and causing some really serious infections in both children and adults. Okay, so you guys, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to look at the handout. This is Life Cycles of Valley Fever, because down below, you guys, it kind of gives us an idea of what happens when we get infected. So you guys, let's say of 100 people that get infected, let's say 100 of us get infected, as long as you have a good, strong immune system, you guys, 60 of you would be asymptomatic. What does that mean? What does asymptomatic mean? No signs, no, you don't even know you're sick, right? And again, you guys, with a strong immune system, your immune system will handle the Coccidioides Immitis. You might end up with some lesions on your lungs, right, from these healed Coccidioides Immitis sites. And you guys, it's really important if you move out of California, especially if you move out of California, and if later in life you get a chest radiograph, a chest X-ray, and the doctor says, wow, you know, we're seeing some spots on your lungs and we're worried it could be cancer, remind them you lived in California and they might be old valley fever, healed lesions. There's horror stories of people having lung lobes removed because the doctors thought they had lung cancer and it was just an old valley fever lesion. Okay, so 60%, in fact, probably you guys, a lot of us have been infected and we either didn't know it or we thought maybe we had the flu, right? Everything starts out like the flu. But then most of us, even if we have flu-like symptoms, most of us eventually will heal, you know, won't have any problem. But you guys, a few people, and usually these are folks that have compromised immune systems. So again, you guys are going to worry about cancer patients, HIV/AIDS patients. Oh, one of your colleagues, her brother got infected, and the doctor said it was because he was a long-term smoker, right? Long-term smoker. In those cases, you guys, the immune system can't control the Coccidioides Immitis, and it can spread. It can spread to skin, to bone, and the really bad news, you guys, it can spread to the central nervous system. And once it's spread, it becomes really, really hard to treat, right? So maybe early in the infection, they would try to use some of the less toxic antifungal drugs, but if the fungus doesn't respond, you guys, then they often have to turn to which is a really toxic antifungal drug we talked about that binds to ergosterol and the fungal cell membranes and causes them to get leaky. Amphotericin B, right? And again, that treatment can be really rough on the patient. Okay. So you guys, so again, we want to recognize in the San Joaquin Valley, it's endemic, and it tends to be endemic in the southwestern U.S. So like if you move to Arizona, that's a hotbed for it as well. Yeah. Okay. So that's our Coccidioides Immitis. Oh, and sorry, folks, one more thing. We said it's dimorphic. So it grows as a filamentous mold in the environment. When we inhale the spores and the spores germinate, it switches to a unicellular yeast-like phase. And what will happen in the lung, you'll see these little structures, they're called spherules, and they're filled with these little unicellular yeast-like stage, and the spherule can break open, and then those little yeasties can spread throughout the body. Yeah. So if a person has active valley fever, you're going to take a radiograph, and you'll see those the lesions on the lungs. Yeah. Okay. And then the last one, you guys, Coccidioides. The last one, you guys, would be a total bonus, but this is one that is invading us. So it's kind of, I think it is good for us to know about this fungal pathogen. Again, it's dimorphic, filamentous mold in the environment, produces spores, we inhale them, it switches to a unicellular yeast stage in us, you guys. The genus name is Cryptococcus. Now, back in the old days when I was going to school, they would only talk about one species, this Cryptococcus Neoformans, and they said this is an opportunistic pathogen. So again, we're going to worry about our immunocompromised patients, our HIV/AIDS patients, cancer patients, transplant patients, right? They're often on long-term immunosuppressive therapy. Anybody on long-term steroid use, or anybody who has autoimmune disorders and they're on drugs to suppress the immune system, those are our high-risk patients. And what we were taught back in the day, you guys, is that Cryptococcus Neoformans is associated with bird feces. The bird feces enriches the soil for the Cryptococcus Neoformans. And as a consequence, you guys, if you had or have patients in those high-risk groups, you would tell them, stay away from birds, right? This is a reason, you guys, that hospitals don't want pigeons roosting near their air intake vents, right? Because wherever there's bird feces, there's a chance of the Cryptococcus spores being present. And you guys, Cryptococcus, kind of similar to Coccidioides Immitis. It first infects the lung, switches to the unicellular yeast phase, And Cryptococcus, you guys, are notorious for this incredibly thick polysaccharide capsule. They've got the thickest polysaccharide capsule. And what do you think is the benefit of the Cryptococcus making that capsule when they invade us? What do bacterial capsules, how do they help? They're antiphagocytic, right? So that thick capsule is going to inhibit phagocytosis. So again, you guys, and especially the immunocompromised, the yeast can spread from the lungs through the blood, and a lot of times you'll end up with a meningitis. And this, again, your HIV/AIDS patient, really high risk for this. Yeah. So again, dimorphic grows as a filamentous mold in the environment, and then switches to the unicellular yeast phase once it gets into us. Now, the second species, you guys, is called Cryptococcus Gattie, and I just listened to this great YouTube link, and I put the link, you guys, at the bottom of the fungal images that I put on Canvas, because it was a new little talk that I heard, and it turns out this I'll turn the lights on. Here, a little bit more. So, you guys, for the Cryptococcus Gattie, in the old days, meaning last year, I was telling students, well, Cryptococcus Neoformans was one distinct species of Cryptococcus, and Cryptococcus Gattie was a second distinct species of Cryptococcus. And the original story was Cryptococcus Gattie was imported to North America from Australia, right? So it was like, blame the Australians, it's all their fault. And so they started seeing infections on the west coast of Canada, and they've been moving south. These infections have been moving south. And what's really disturbing is Cryptococcus Gattie is really virulent. It's causing serious infection in immunocompetent people. What do we mean by immunocompetent? People with strong immune systems, right? And the understanding is that they're associated with specific plants, like one plant being eucalyptus, and I think that's why they thought blamed the Australians, those doggone eucalyptus trees. But they have been found associated with other plants as well. So this talk that I thought was fascinating, they said they've done the DNA sequencing, and it turns out these are probably related, and probably the origin was about 100 years ago in the Amazon basin of South America. And they think, one thought is that ships that was carrying lumber from the Amazon forest, that the ships bringing lumber to North America maybe brought the original Cryptococcus to North America. And furthermore, they said that the Cryptococcus survives well in seawater. And in the old days, well, still today, the ships would carry seawater with them as, I forget what it is, if it's called ballast, called bilge water. So they might have collected water in South America that had Cryptococcus spores in it, and then when they came up to North America, they would release the seawater, and that was another source of contamination. So it turns out, you guys, it wasn't blame the Australians. The Cryptococcus probably all arose in the Americas, right? And now it's slowly spreading and evolving into these different, more virulent strains, yeah? So just wanted to let you know about that, because a lot of you will be working with really immunocompromised patients. So meningitis, neurological signs, don't forget the fungi, right? They could be the cause. Okay, so let me stop the movie and then just give you an overview of what we're gonna, what the hands-on part of today is gonna be. And thanks for your patience with this.